Coming up next on the podcast, a conversation with Halie Soifer about Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, Israel, and Jewish Democrats.
Jewish Americans stand with Kamala Harris because she stands with us.
On Israel, she's clear.
I have had an unwavering commitment to the existence of the State of Israel, to its security, and to the people of Israel.
On anti-Semitism, Kamala is clear.
I'll tell you what, Bibi Netanyahu agrees. I said, Bibi, let me ask you a question. Why is it, how is it that people that are Jewish vote Democrat? He said it's a habit. It's almost a habit. It's true. They're used to voting for Democrats. The Democrats hate Israel.
Halie Soifer is the CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. She was a senior policy advisor in the Obama administration and has served as a national security advisor to 4 members of Congress, one of them having been Senator Kamala Harris. Halie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I guess I should say congratulations or mazel tov, because I understand that the Jewish Democratic Council of America has just released its first campaign ad starring Kamala Harris.
We have just in the past few minutes, actually. So we're really proud to release this ad, which demonstrates her strong support of Israel, her efforts to combat anti-Semitism, the fact that she's a defender of democracy and abortion rights. And it ends with Jewish Americans stand with Kamala Harris because she stands with us. Those are the issues that Jews are voting on in this election. And these are the issues that matter the most and that she has a great record on.
And features an image of her and her Jewish husband lighting the Hanukkah candles.
Absolutely. We had the second gentleman join an event, our Kamala kickoff last week, and he pledged to put a mezuzah on the White House when he hopefully can serve as the first Jewish first gentleman. So her candidacy is obviously historic for many reasons, including the fact that it would be the first Jewish spouse of a president in our history. We're very excited.
Well, I don't want to put a damper on the mood, and I definitely want to talk a lot about Kamala Harris, but breaking news, I couldn't ignore the fact that this morning in Israel, the leading TV headlines included a soundbite from a speech by GOP presidential candidate Donald Trump to fundraisers in New Jersey. He said, quote, "I asked Netanyahu why some Jews vote for Democrats. He says it's a habit. That's true. It's a habit. But the Democrats hate Israel." Now, that's not the first time Trump has sounded that theme, and I kind of think we're going to hear it some more over the course of the campaign. But after what we've been through with the Gaza war, the renewed debate over anti-Semitism on the left, following the rhetoric of some of the anti-war protesters, do you think this Trump message that we've heard before and will hear again has any better chance at landing, either with the Jews themselves or the American public?
Well, it says a lot about where he is right now in this campaign. He's obviously feeling the heat now that the vice president is our candidate, and she has exceeded all expectations, raising $200 million in the first week. Just the excitement that she has generated among not just Democrats, but also independent voters and younger voters. And he can't really speak about the issues, so he continues to traffic in vitriol and hate and lies. This is his playbook for the past 8 years, right? Remember, he's been a candidate 3 times. And he's done this since 2016 in that election. He did it again in 2020, and now here he is doing it again today. He also has said that Jews who support Democrats, and keep in mind that is 3/4 of the Jewish American voting population, he has said that we are uninformed, that we are disloyal, that we hate Israel, that we hate our religion. And he continues to spew hate at the vast majority of Jewish Americans. And then, the latest that, he decides Kamala Harris doesn't stand with Israel, which, by the way, is patently false, is, again, yet another iteration of his toxic vitriol. And it's targeting Jewish voters, and we should call it out for what it is. It is hate, and we reject it.
The consensus among the majority of Israelis and its supporters in the U.S. is that Biden's policies towards Israel, his handling of the war, and the handling of the opposition to some of his policies within his own party really has been excellent. There's been a lot of support and praise for it. In the campaign, do you predict a no daylight attitude between Harris and Biden, or do you think that the new presidential candidate is going to try to carve out her own set of ideas and policies towards Israel that is somehow distinct from Biden's?
I think there will continue to be no daylight between them with regard to Israel. And it's not just speculation. I know that the vice president strongly stands with Israel. I, as you mentioned, had the privilege of working for her in the Senate. I was her national security advisor her first month in the Senate for almost 2 years, and I traveled to Israel with her. I saw firsthand her commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship and Israel's security. Her support of Israel predates even her time in the White House. She has always been a staunch supporter of U.S. military aid to Israel, of the security relationship, of every aspect of the U.S. relationship with Israel. So, of course, when she entered this White House, her position did not change. She shares the views of President Biden on Israel. But it's important to note that's not just because she's the vice president. That's because she came into this White House with that deep commitment to Israel. In this White House, she has been in lockstep with the president on every key issue related to Israel in the lead up to and now in the aftermath of the horrific attacks of October 7th. After that attack, she has been unequivocal in her condemnation of Hamas. I recently attended an event at the White House that she led, calling out the horrific sexual violence that we saw perpetrated by Hamas, bringing attention to this issue that the international community turned its back on for far too long, but making sure that it was clear that rape should never be used as a weapon of war, which we saw Hamas do on October 7th. We've also seen her be a lead in this White House when it comes to not just standing with Israel, but standing with Jewish Americans, given the rise of anti-Semitism. Both her and the second gentleman have been leaders in the development of and now implementation of the first ever unprecedented strategy to combat anti-Semitism in our country. And she's been very clear condemning anti-Semitism, including on college campuses. So she truly stands with Jewish voters on every issue that matters, and it includes the issue of Israel.
Well, there are Jewish voters on the far left flank who aren't necessarily as, reflexively pro-Israel as Biden and Harris. There's also that side of the coin, too.
Sure, we're not a monolith. There are Jewish voters that have a range of views with regard to Israel. But as we've seen with President Biden, as the pressure has increased from the left to potentially change his position with regard to Israel, he's a principled leader who is not going to bend to political pressure. His support of Israel is steadfast, and the same can be said for the vice president. This stands in stark contrast to the positions of Donald Trump, whose own former national security advisor, John Bolton, said to the New York Times in April that his support of Israel in the second term is not guaranteed. Donald Trump only does what's good for Donald Trump.
Halie, I'm curious, from your experience working closely with Kamala Harris as her national security advisor, would you say there's like a Harris philosophy or a Harris doctrine on foreign policy? Does she have an overall attitude? And if so, what is it? And how does Israel and the Middle East fit in?
So when she entered the Senate, it was the same month, if not week, that every U.S. intelligence agency declared that Russia had interfered in our 2016 election. This was, at the time, as you recall, a historic national security issue, and she got to work as part of the Senate Intelligence Committee investigating Russia's threat to our democracy. For the next 3 years, she undertook this investigation of the threat posed to Russia. That provided a very strong foundation for what she would go on to do as vice president, which is be one of the leading voices for this administration's foreign policy and national security, really based in the fundamental belief that we must defend our democracy at home and abroad and our international norms and rule of law. These are really fundamental, both to her national security policies as well as foreign policy and domestic policy for that matter. And it stands in stark contrast to that of Donald Trump, who even at that time in 2017 denied Russia's role, of course, which helped him, denied Russia's role attacking our democracy. And he's aligned with Vladimir Putin, as it's now for over 2.5 years attacked our ally Ukraine and its democracy. There could not be a more stark contrast between Kamala Harris, who believes in defending our democracies, versus Donald Trump, who has said he wants to be a dictator on day one. And he aligns with dictators like Putin, like Orban. Just this past weekend, he's told a group of voters at one of his rallies, Christians he identified them as, just vote this one time and you won't have to vote again. I'll fix it. He is a direct threat to our democracy, and frankly, by aligning with dictators like Putin, to democracies abroad. So this is fundamental to Kamala Harris defending against those threats.
Do you think she's going to be addressing foreign policy a lot during the campaign, or do you think this is something that Biden will carry the water for her per se, and that foreign policy and Israel and the Gaza war is something that he's going to be wanting to focus on because he's going to be looking at his legacy? Or do you think that she's going to be active and outspoken in it?
Well, it's important to consider she's playing two roles now, right? She is obviously the candidate for president, but she's also continuing to serve as the vice president. I do think that President Biden will have the opportunity and time to focus on issues that mean so much to him, including a future in the Middle East without war, and to focus on, in the near term, bringing about a ceasefire that ensures the return of the hostages. And as he continues to say, and the vice president has said, that the hostages get out and that aid continues to get in to Gaza. This is fundamental and it must happen soon. The one thing that's not going to happen is that there'll be a fundamental difference between their positions.
So your ad shows Kamala Harris and her husband lighting the Hanukkah candles. So that just leads me to think, how has having a Jewish spouse, do you think, affected her? She's obviously been confronting racism and sexism throughout her career. In the discussion of vice presidential candidate choices, I've heard that she really personally favors Josh Shapiro, the popular governor of the swing state of Pennsylvania. But some say that the first woman of color running for president married to a Jewish man can't afford a Jewish running mate, that, two Jewish mates might be a little much. Do you agree? And in general, how has being the wife of a Jewish man affected her attitude towards racism against Jews?
Well, it's who she is. If elected, she would be the first woman, the first Black woman, the first Asian woman, and the first spouse of a Jewish, hopefully, first gentleman. And this is her family. It's who she is. She is a part of our community, and she has embraced Doug's, our second gentleman's, Jewish background and traditions. And I mean, I've seen it firsthand. Not only is there a mezuzah for the first time on the residence of the vice president, but also they celebrate the holidays. I was there at their Seder on the second night of Passover this year to not just be a part of it, in that it was very meaningful, but it was additionally meaningful to see that it means a lot to the vice president. They have attended services at my synagogue for the high holidays. They are a part of our community. And a part of that, given their leadership roles, means also defending our community against the increased threat of anti Semitism. That's why the second gentleman has been such a leader in this White House. And this is his full time job. He is working in this White House to ensure that Jews are safe given the rise of anti Semitism. He led with Ambassador Lipstadt the development of this strategy to combat anti Semitism, and they have both been leaders in its implementation, even strengthening the tools that are available for the US government to counter anti Semitism wherever it may emerge. And we've seen it on college campuses, we've seen it elsewhere. So ensuring that every part of the US government has the ability to take action to combat anti Semitism and make our community more secure.
Polling shows a huge shift of attitudes towards Israel in the younger generation, including younger Jews. So stepping away from Harris for a moment and just looking at the Democratic Party as a whole, what changes do you see in the party? Do you see, an inevitable generational evolution when it comes to Israel among Democrats?
There is a generational divide on this issue. We've seen it in polling. There was a poll that was done a month after October 7th by the Jewish Electorate Institute. It looked at Jewish voters' support of the president's approach to the conflict at that point, a month into it. And the national numbers showed 74% of Jewish voters stood with President Biden and how he was handling the war. But when you look closer at age, there is a gap, and younger voters do view this differently. On the whole, of course, again, no group of voters is a monolith, so it's not the case with all young Jewish voters, but some do. For voters who believe the president or vice president has been too aligned with Israel, it's important that they not view this conflict through a binary lens. It's not binary. One can be staunch and unequivocal in their condemnation, and one should be unequivocal in their condemnation of the horrific scourge of terror that we saw on October 7th, and also not want to see the suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza, recognizing the distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people. So that's why this administration has been so adamant about the importance of getting aid, whether it's food or medicine or other emergency humanitarian aid, into Gaza to end the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza.
Are you worried about the convention being disrupted by, Gaza-related demonstrations? Or do you think that, with the transition from Biden to Harris, that maybe it's going to be a calmer scene than was expected?
I wouldn't say I'm worried, but I'm pretty clear-eyed. There will be protesters. We've seen protesters on our college campuses. We've seen them throughout the country, and they attempt to exploit high-profile moments like the convention. So they will be there. They're not going to influence the power and moment of this convention. This is going to be a historic convention. And we've already seen in just the past 8 days since Vice President Harris has been our candidate, we have seen such excitement and such surge. She has fundamentally changed the trajectory of this election. President Biden was not winning just over 100 days ago, and now Vice President Harris has changed that. She is within the margin of error in all of the key battleground states. And, it's important to realize that this election is going to be close, just like the last one was. But it will be decided by probably about 6% of voters in 6 states: Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So we're not talking about a lot of voters who are going to decide the outcome of this election, which is why the Jewish vote is so important. Because the Jewish vote, we show up we vote, and we overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. And in this election, we are going to overwhelmingly, I predict by about 75% of Jewish voters will support Kamala Harris. So yes, there might be some protesters there. We'll, walk around them as we get to doing the work of this convention, which is all about electing Kamala Harris.
And Halie, many of these important swing states have significant Jewish populations, so getting out the Jewish vote in full there is really important.
Absolutely. The Jewish vote continues to make a difference. First of all, we vote at higher numbers than the American electorate writ large, on average by about 10 to 15 points higher. Our turnout is very strong, which means that Jewish voters have a disproportionately higher impact than the numbers might suggest on an election. We also overwhelmingly support Democrats because Democrats align with Jewish voters on every key issue that we're voting on: the defense of our democracy, abortion rights, combating right-wing extremism and anti-Semitism, and standing with Israel. In addition, where we live matters. And if you look at the 2020 election, which Joe Biden won by a popular vote of 7 million, but unfortunately, that's not how we elect our presidents here. So by electoral college vote, it was just about 110,000 voters. In Pennsylvania, where he won by 80,000, in Wisconsin, where he won by just over 20,000, and in Georgia, where he won by 11,799 votes. And I will always remember that number because of the Fulton County indictment of Donald Trump. That's the number of votes he said he needed. But that's just over 110,000 votes. In all those states, the number of Jewish voters is exponentially higher than that margin by which Joe Biden won. And the number of Jewish voters who voted for Biden was much, much higher. So the number of Jewish voters in all these key battleground states can and will make the difference for Kamala Harris in this election.
Halie Soifer, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.